Welcome to Lecture on the Lawn. My name is Marc Kohler. That's Dawn Williams. That's Tyler Grimes. And there's a guy named Bob Geek around here. He's a geek tonight. Bob and I have never spoken to each other before he invited me to come and set up this panel. What he had gotten was a monthly email that I send out as the Roger Williams Educational Foundation, and apparently he found it interesting. And so out of the blue, without discussing it, he said, why don't you make a panel for June 10th? And you can bring in people from the foundation. And so three of us work pretty much with in the foundation. We meet once a month. And we have a Zoom meeting, and we talk about Roger Williams on different themes. So tonight, we're going to have 4 presentations, all 15 minutes. And then we're going to have questions. And I will say, for the first time in my career, I actually have a script. My first job is to tell you that I'm going to change your ideas about Roger Williams. My goal is to move you to talk about Roger and increase the knowledge and appreciation for Roger in Rhode Island. I also invite you all and your friends to meet me June 9th, 2022. That will be, whoops, don't turn the page till you finish it. No, 2022, and that will be 1 year from tonight. And I have also made it the 9th instead of the 10th, so it'll be another Thursday night. And you are all invited to come again and share your stories of what it's been like to talk to people about Roger Williams. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun in a year, because I'm calling this year the revival of Roger Williams. I also want to talk about many things that we've learned about Roger Williams over the past 4 years. I only started studying him 4 years ago. Most probably know something about Roger, and some of what you know may not be exactly true. And what you also may know are things that actually demean Roger Williams. Take, for example, we have a population of 1,060,000 people. 10% of that is 100,000. 10% of that 100,000 is 10,000. I would estimate that the knowledge of Roger Williams does not go past that 10,000. That less than 1% of our population has any real comprehension of who Roger was, what he believed, what he fought for, what he accomplished, and the credit he deserves for it. I'm not going to stay on my words. So, let's think about what those 10,000 people think. First of all, they think Roger was a minister. Secondly, Roger bought the land for Providence from the Narragansett. And Roger was the sole founder of the Baptist Church of America. And the fourth thing is that Roger Williams had something to do with separation of church and state and the First Amendment. I don't think any of those are right. Roger Williams is not a minister. He worked as a minister for the Mashams. He may have taken some money when he worked as a minister in Salem. We know he did not get any money in Plymouth. And his month and a half with the Baptists, no money was exchanged there. The problem with calling Roger Williams a minister is we think of a parsonage. We think of a congregation. Most importantly, we think about a denomination. Now, how many people can tell me what the denomination was of Roger Williams? He had none. Even the Baptists don't take credit for him. If you look at the lists of famous Baptists, his name's not on it. And so this makes a problem for us, because in Pembroke College at Cambridge, they have names of all the celebrities who went to that college. And for Roger Williams, they say, not minister. They call him a statesman and a theologian. So over the next year, anytime someone calls Roger a minister, you can say, oh, no, 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 no. He was a theologian. And he was a theologian because of the writing that I gave you tonight. This is Christianese Do Not Make Christians. In this 11-page talk, Roger defines a very slim definition of what a Christian does and doesn't do. What you need to know if you're going to be converting to being a Christian. Pope or a priest or a priesthood, which was picked up by the religion as it went on. In other words, he had his own form of Christianity. Now the second one is that he founded the Baptist Church in America. Well, that's interesting because what happened in 1638 is about a dozen people came down to Rhode Island because they got kicked out of Massachusetts. And on one day, Mr. Holloman baptized Roger. We don't know whether he was baptized a little bit or baptized in water. And then Roger baptized the next 20 people. And we have a church. Actually, it's a Baptist church. And then what happens 6 weeks later? Roger quits. He says, I don't like this. I'm going to be a seeker. And there's a lot of debate about what seeker means. But if you think about this, Roger Williams did not belong to a Christian denomination for the next 43 years. Who he was different than everyone else. And that's something nobody wants to admit. Because he had he had a term for Christian nations. They called them Christendoms. And then he would point out, among those Christendoms, how many Christians were there? How many Christians were really in that group? And he insisted over and over again, you can never call a nation a Christian nation. The third one is that Roger bought the land from the Narragansetts. Oh, incidentally, just the one about the church. That issue wasn't resolved till 1830. There were people who followed John Clark, loved John Clark, and they all want John Clark to be credited with the Church of Baptist starting in America. And they have their own colonies charter in a room all dedicated. They have a John Clark holiday, and Roger Williams isn't mentioned in any of those displays. Third one, Roger bought the land from the Narragansett. That sounds nice, doesn't it? It's also wrong. Roger Williams is not like the guys who took over the Caribbean. They bought land from the Indians, and they killed them all. Within 30 years, there were no more Taino Indians on the island. No more Taino Indians. None. And if you say Roger Williams bought this land, what you're really doing is hiding who he really was. He learned Algonquin. It was one of the first things he did when he came to America. He was a very sociable man. He loved talking to people because he ran trading posts. Now, to run a trading post, you have to be able to judge people. You have to be able to judge how much they want to pay for something or how much you want them to be paid for what they're bringing in. It is said throughout his whole life that even his gravest enemies in the church struggles thought he was the nicest man they ever met. In fact, what we really should say about Roger is that he knew the Indians, the Abnakis, the Pencocks, the Nashua, the Passalaqua, the Wickapees, Massachusetts, the Wampanoags, who we call Wampanoags today, but their real name was Poconokeets, the Nymacks, the Poconuts, the Mohegan, and the Nasset, and others. I will tell you this, Roger didn't know all of them, but I'm pretty sure they knew him. They knew about that white fellow, that colonial who spoke their language. And that is very important because it gave Roger the opportunity to move from one tribe to another. He wasn't just for the Narragansetts, he was not too good with the Pequot, and he certainly had troubles with the Pokanokets at some point. In fact, after the war, 1676, if you use the word Pokanoket, they'd kill you. That's why we call the Pokanokets Wampanoags, even though the Wampanoags were a group of about 17 tribes, and the Pokanokets were one of those. So what I'm trying to say is, what Roger did with the Indians wasn't just by land. It demeans him. It takes away his skill. It takes away his linguistic skill. We think he learned French and Dutch before he was 12. And all the histories say he learned Latin in college. That's odd, since he started doing stenography for Edward Cook when he was 12. And every one of Edward Cook's books, his institutes or his reports, were published what? In English and Latin. So Roger knew Latin by the time he was 12 or 13. And I think there's a good chance he knew Greek. He did pick up maybe Hebrew and French when he was in college. But he spoke, then he added Algonquin. And if you talk to people who care about this field, you'll say, well, Roger spoke 6 languages. And they go, yeah, everyone did. No. The gentry in England did learn French occasionally. They didn't like Dutch. And the fact of the matter is that Roger Williams was one of the finest linguists of the era. When he was in England in 1652, he had lessons with a man named John Milton. You may have heard of him. Milton wanted his Hebrew improved. This man was brilliant. The fact of the matter is, the word we should be using for Roger Williams is genius. So those are the 4 things that the people in Rhode Island know. But I'm going to add 2 more things. Oh, the 4th one was the Constitution in the First Amendment, and I think most of us will agree that Roger Williams played a role in that, but does not get the credit he deserves. And I'm going to talk about those two things about that, last things. No one talks about Edward Cook. His name is spelled C-O-K-E. It's not Coke, it's Cook. He started practicing law around 1516. He lived to be 80 years old. By the time he was a lawyer, he was writing what he called reports. And these were 1 or 2 cases that come to the court, and he would write a report about it. And Mr. Cook was very much concerned about with how much money he had, mostly through marriage. And so he also then hired stenographers. He didn't have just one stenographer or amanuensis. He had several, and he would send them all out to every trial in London. This is the amazing part about it, because we talk about Roger as if he was Cook's brother, or Cook's son, or Cook's best friend. But in fact, Roger was probably the youngest stenographer he ever had. And if you don't know about Cook, you don't know about Roger. For 6 years he worked for him. And in those 6 years, Judge Cook lost his seat. I think it was James kicked him out. And then he got to a point where he had no court to go to. Then, while Roger was about 16 years old, Cook kidnaps his daughter. She runs to a house and hides in it. The mother hides her. Cook brings the army in to take the girl. She's then taken to London, where she's forced to marry the brother of a fellow named Buckingham. Does anyone know who Buckingham was? He was the king's number 2 man. And there was a great deal of money involved in this. And guess who ended up in prison because of this? Mrs. Cook. Mrs. Cook ended up in prison. And she spent the rest of her life attacking her husband. Her husband was a ruthless, ruthless person. How many people know how Francis Bacon died? Executed by Cook. They fought through their careers for decades. Cook was an unforgivable monster. So the question is, if you spent 6 years with this man, why didn't you pick up some of his skills? He was rich, he had women, he had everything. What did Roger, a friend of mine asked me, well, Cook couldn't be that bad, because Roger wouldn't have stood for it. Because if he was that bad, Roger would have left. I don't think that's true. I think Roger knew exactly what Cook was. And this is why you have to know Cook to know Roger. If he worked and got to know Cook, he should have become a thief. But he didn't. And this is an incredible part of the Cook story. Actually, Roger was probably closer to Cook than his own father. And his own father died when he was 20. So Cook is a big deal, but when you read about Cook, you will find out he's a monster. And Roger Williams comes out being Roger Williams. I think that's amazing. And the last thing I have for you is Roger's role in the writing of our Constitution. I heard a speaker say not too long ago that Roger Williams had nothing to do with the Constitution at all. That Jefferson didn't read him, and Madison didn't read him, and Washington, nobody read him. That's not true. Because there's two men who made sure that the ideas of Roger Williams got to our founders. One of them was Stephen Hopkins. Does everybody know who Stephen Hopkins is? He's the first governor of Rhode Island, one of the governors of Rhode Island. A great man, a great scholar. And he wrote a lot of information in actually periodicals about Roger Williams. This is about 100 years after Roger had passed away. And those originals of those periodicals are at the Rhode Island Historical Society. But the man who really pushed Roger on the founders was a man named Isaac Backus. I bet you don't know who Isaac Backus was, so I'll tell you. He was the leading Baptist minister in New England. And when he started his ministry with no education, there were 17 Baptist churches in New England. When he retired, there were 300. This man was one of the most active religious ministers you'd ever see. He was opening new churches, he was gaining prestige, and when he was 40 years old, he was invited to join a group of men who were starting a new college called the College of Rhode Island, 1765. And gosh, he got to be on the board of trustees. Now he's walking and talking and working with the same men who are going to write our Constitution. He did that job for 34 years. He was a trustee of Brown University for 34 years. And don't tell me he didn't affect people. He wrote a 2-volume history of New England with an emphasis on the religion called Baptist. In 2 volumes, 1,200 pages. Over 100 of those pages have Roger Williams' comments and names on it. In fact, there's even a hidden where he actually has a biography of Roger Williams. And the fact of the matter is, Isaac Backus went to many public meetings, especially with the Massachusetts founders, because why? Because it's 1776, 1777, Massachusetts had laws against Baptists. And Backus let them know it. We have reports both from Backus and other people who were at these meetings, and you know this man was not someone to be stepped on or ignored. So when people say, we don't know if Roger Williams had anything to do with the Constitution, I guess I say that's a lot of hooey. Thank you. Now, would Tyler, you want to come up? Or do you guys want to ask more questions or something? I'm sorry I get so upset, too.
Everyone's frozen. We're frozen.
Yeah, I know, so am I. All right, well, thank you. Listen, let's be serious. There's over 25 people here. I only made 25 copies of the essay by Roger Williams, which if you read aloud, you'll understand it better. But this piece of work, this is Christians Do Not Make Christians, is profound. Once you read that, you will understand that Roger was not playing any games. He was not living in the world of Edward Cook. He did live in that world. This is the part about it that's so amazing. And when he lived in Providence, he was on everybody's case. Everybody who had any problem in the world would come to Roger for them to solve it. And then if you actually get the copy of this article, when this was published in 1881, they put about 6 or 7 letters that Roger had written, and you know what they are? They're people. He's telling people they messed up badly, and then another letter he's apologizing for how he messed up. But when you read them, you're going, this guy must have known everybody, and yet he never got into an argument. And his greatest other contribution to our life, if you get to read a book called Mere Civility, written by a woman named Bijan. She's a teacher in London, and she emphasizes the fact that Roger Williams ensured civility to be in our state business. Any other questions? Thank you very much. And I give yourselves a big applause. This is 25 people on the coldest night of the year. You're all fantastic. Thank you for coming.